Shemos chapter 19. This chapter is the chapter that includes two main important parts. We usually know it as the chapter of the preparation, the achana, the beginning of the story of Matan Torah, which is the story of the Aseres Adibres. But that definition is a little bit complicated because we need to really understand this. Since we're reading this chapter by chapter, we should really understand this as standing on its own. And it has its own story going on, this chapter, and it's even possible to read it backwards. In other words, we could read the Aseres Adibres, which are in the next chapter, as part or an auxiliary of this chapter and not vice versa. And I'll explain why. So this chapter includes mainly two things. The first is the story of the bris, the covenant, the agreement, the contract, the treaty that Hashem is making in this place with the people. That's the framing that we have in this story. And this is something that's usually less noticed, which is that the story of the Aseres Adibres should be seen as but the details or some of the details of this bris, of this contract. The second thing that this chapter has, which again, the Aseres Adibres should be seen in some way as only the implementation of, but not as the main story. In other words, that's how we see one thing that happened within this story. So this is the frame, is the story of, this is what we call the preparation, but really is the Hagbula, the gating of the mountain and giving all the people their place around the mountain. And that itself seems to be an important thing. And we'll try to explain it in a minute. Let's first read the story and make some notices of what it says. So the first thing is we have a date, a time. It doesn't have a day this date, it only has the month. We've already discussed in the last two chapters how whenever you see a story that has a date, there's something important. Dates in general are the big thing that ties a long story together, right? If you read the whole story all the way from the beginning of Yetzias Mitzrayim, and maybe in some sense all the way through to the end of the Tanakh, to the end of the history of the Tanakh, the thing that ties the whole thing together is in some significant sense the dates. So the dates both give you the chronology, in other words, the order of what happened first and what happened after. But there's also some meaning in the sense that this ties together the story. So it's important to say that this happened 3 months in the third month after Yetzias Mitzrayim. And we could see that it's after the story of the man, which happened in the second month after Yetzias Mitzrayim, and so on, and before other things that happened in another year. So that's one thing that these chronological notes tell us. They might also tell us something about that specific date, but we don't have that here. In other words, in the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim itself, for example, we have a date and a time, right? In the 15th day of the first month. The same thing we had in the story of the month, the 15th day of the second month. As we explained, that seems to be important. It's trying to connect it. The 15th day. This was exactly 1 month later. There seems to be a connection, and maybe also there must be some celebration of this day. In the first one, we know that this day, the 15th day of the first month, gets celebrated every year as with the Karban Pesach, with Chag HaMatzos. And maybe in some sense, anytime we have a date, which is a particular date, it has a day and a month, that might be the message. Over here, we actually have a date that has only a month. It doesn't have a day. Of course, if you read Chazal, they'll try to figure out what the day was, because they're interested in finding out exactly when everything was, and also to signify these dates. But that's not what we have. So we do have some connection, but it's important to know that it's the third month after Yetzias Mitzrayim. It's not important to know which day it was. That's the first thing. Second thing we have is the Vayisu Vayachnu formula, right? They went from Refidim to Midbar Sinai. Or really, Vayisu says Refidim, Vayachnu Bamidbar. And which Midbar? The Midbar Sinai, which might be a part of the Midbar Sinai. And again, Vayichnu, Vayichan Sham Yisrael Neged Dahar. There might be something going on here in the sense that we have the mountain and we have the Midbar. And we already heard before, he was already in Parshas Yisra by Hara Elohim, which seems to be the same mountain. So it seems like maybe this is something that already happened before Yisra came, or maybe this is something, somehow the people were around in the Midbar, Neged Dahar, not close to the mountain, far from it. But Moshe, as we'll see, was going to the mountain as the next thing starts. Okay, so now the next thing is the story of the bris, and really including the story of Moshe going to the mountain where Elohim is, where Hashem is, and there's the beginning of a kind of call and response, or really a proposal and an acceptance. So Hashem proposes some kind of deal, and he's waiting for the people to say if they accept it. And now we have the proposal in some high poetry, so it seems like this is meant to be part of a poetic story. It's not just a dry kind of deal. There's a very poetic presentation here, and we can see it because it has the signatures of biblical poetry. There's doublings of almost everything, and there's just very flowery language we can see. And what the poetry says, this is basically the proposal. That's a very simple proposal that is the proposal of the bris of the whole Torah, but it's said in a very nice way. And it says like this: this is what Hashem tells Moshe, this is what you should tell the people, and called in the double way, Beis Yaakov, Bnei Yisrael, which is how poetry works. And it comes like this. First, it gives a presentation of what Hashem did for us. So, in some sense, who Hashem is. It doesn't introduce himself, though usually Hashem would introduce himself. We have that later in the more formal version of the bris, which is the Seder Bris. Hashem introduces himself. Here he doesn't introduce himself. He says what he did. He says, you've seen what I did to Mitzrayim, and he defines what he did, or how he brought them to him meaning to the Har Elohim, in very high language. It says, I've carried you on the eagle's wings and brought you to me. Of course, this is an image of something, right? It means something like going very quickly or something very unexpected. It doesn't literally mean eagle's wings. It's a poetic metaphor. Va'atu, and now, and therefore, va'atu always means not now in time, but like, and therefore, and now, in the argument, this is what I propose. And there's a im. If you will listen to me and follow and keep my covenant, then you will have two things. You would be Segula Mekalu Amim, and you would be Meleches Kehanim V'Goy Kodesh. So whatever these things are, it is not very defined. It means something like you will be special to me. I will protect you more than all the nations. All of the nations belong to me. Li Kol Haaretz, all the earth is mine, but you will be mine. That is the deal. So that's the deal. And he signs off and he says, this is what you should tell them. And then we have Moshe going to the people and giving them this proposal. And who does he go to? The Ziknei Yoam, who, as we've seen, are the leaders, the elders of the tribes, who are the ones that are going to make the decisions for everyone. And Vayosem Lefnaim Sadvarim. He puts before them. Vayosem Lefnaim is always a language that means putting down a proposal. So he gave them the proposal. This is Hashem's proposal. And they answered and they said, everything Hashem did, we will do. So they're saying yes to the proposal, and Moshe returns their words to Hashem. Now, we have a new thing. So this is the first thing, and I said this is the proposal, and they accept the proposal. It seems like it's not yet the actual, like the formal act of signing the proposal. It's more that they have now said that they will come to the signing, to the signing ceremony. So then what we have is Hashem gives Moshe the details of the ceremony of him, how he will come, because of course if you want to make a deal with someone, then that person or that entity has to be there. So Hashem has to be there, and in that state he will be able to make this deal, to officially make the deal with the people. Now, when Hashem comes in a place, that's a very dangerous situation. Of course, Moshe is now speaking to him, so obviously Moshe knows how to deal with this. He is ready for it. He knows what to do and how to be there. But for the people to come, that's not a simple proposition. You need to have a lot of protection and a lot of care with this. So therefore, we get what's called mitzvah hagbala. Mitzvah hagbala is just a general thing. Whenever Hashem comes in a place, there needs to be a lot of care. People who are not worthy, in the sense, who are not prepared, who don't know how to deal with such a thing, shouldn't be there, or they should be far away. They should have the correct care and the correct honor, the correct respect, however you understand this, for this. And for this we get what's called the preparation. And this is what Hashem says explicitly. I said, I will come to you in a cloud, ba'avonan. And why should I come to you? And now I'm giving interpretation, which is, I think, closer to the pshat than what people have heard from the Rambam and others. so they should hear me speaking to you and believe in you or trust in you forever, always. And other people have understood this as the kind of evidence. The Rambam understood this as an evidence. They will see me speaking to you, and therefore they will know that I'm speaking to you. But it's not really, we don't see anywhere that there's a question if God is speaking to Moshe. The real important thing is that they have to see him in order to be able to agree to the contract. You can't sign a deal with someone who you don't know who it is, and you don't know that Moshe is really his messenger. So he will come and they will see him there. He won't speak to them, is what we see, it seems like from here. He won't speak to them. He will be seen by them, and therefore they will believe in the message that Moshe brings from him. And here we have a pasuk that is extra. It says again, Vayagid Moshe's Divra Amal Hashem, which is why there's a medrash on it, but I think that simple meaning is that there isn't a problem here. It just means sometimes psukim repeat themselves for various reasons. In other words, really, this is when it happened. Before it says just for the story to be complete in that part, and here it's when it really happened. So, and then because of this, he tells the Moshe to go to the people and to sanctify them, to prepare them. They should wash themselves, to wash their clothing. They should be ready for the third day, because on the third day he will be descending in front of them. They will see him, and he should tell the people to be very careful from going onto the mountain, because this is dangerous. And he gives a death sentence, a death penalty for anyone that will touch the mountain. And of course, I don't know if this death penalty means that he shall be killed. Maybe it means more like he will be, because, like we see later in the stories of Nudvavi and later the story of Peretz Uzzah and so on, it's very dangerous in between the situation. So this is the threat. It shouldn't be seen as a threat. It should be seen as like a danger sign. And that's what he does. Moshe goes to the people and he tells them to do this. And it's interesting that he changes the instructions. Hashem said, Moshe says something like this. He says, be ready for the third day, for 3 days. Al tiksha, don't go to a woman. So obviously it's self-understood that v'kidashtam or v'chipsisim loisam, being clean, means not touching women, because that's understood to be unclean. So what we can see here already, and we'll see in the next piece also, is that we already established ritual processes and priestly processes. It's not like all of these things were invented in Matan Torah. These things were there, and they're assuming that you understand already how to interact with such a thing. So then we have what actually happens in the third day, in the morning. There's great sounds. Koiles Avroka means literally thunder and lightning. Not lightning, thunder, koiles. Avrokim is lightning, so thunder and lightning. There's a great cloud. There's a very strong shofar. Kol shofar, the sound of a shofar. And everyone shudders. And Moshe takes them towards the Halihim, towards the God. And they stand there at the bottom of the mountain. And there's a lot of smoke, because Hashem has descended on Har Sinai as in a fire, and therefore there's a lot of smoke, like Eshna Kifsham. This is the same image that Avram Avinu had by the Brisbane episode, and Kifshan Aish. There's a great fire and makes a lot of smoke, and there's a cloud, and the whole mountain trembles, and there's this great sound of the shofar. It gets stronger and stronger. Moshe speaks, and literally Moshe speaks words, and they hear these words of Moshe, which they will hear. We don't yet have any words, but this is how it works. In other words, from the God, they hear the sound, the voice, the koil shofar. And of course, like I said, these stories might not be in the correct order, because we have this part that I just read was the description of the great image, the great vision, and then we have another description, another story of Moshe, Hashem telling Moshe to warn the people not to come close. And of course, he already warned them once. So Rashi says we warned them twice, once before and once at the same time. But again, according to me, we don't have to read all these things in chronological order. So this might have been the same thing that he told them earlier, with some added details that we should know at this stage of the story, or something like that. It says Hashem descended to the tip of the mountain. And of course, that should have already happened, because we have the Kodesh Avrokim. Unless you understand that the Kodesh Avrokim happened before he descended, which I don't think is the simple pshat, because that's Vayak Yored Olav Hashem Ba'ash. That's how he descended. And he calls Moshe to him, and Moshe goes up. So there's Hashem going down and Moshe going up, and a very nice parallel. Of course, he already went up before, we already read, but now this is again, because he went down to tell the people. And Hashem tells Moshe to go warn the people. They should not go up. And Yersu al Hashem. Yersu means something like breaking through their boundaries in order to see. And they will fall. In other words, they will die. So here we see clearly, before he said, Ksokal Yisokal, Yoda Yoda, what sounds like a person will stone them or throw them. And here we see they will fall. So maybe it will happen by itself. And now, here we get another thing which we see that there was already an established ritual order, that the Kehanim who go close to Hashem should also be Yiskadosh, should be prepared, should be sanctified. So Hashem shouldn't so there's like a boundary between the divine realm and the human realm. And if the human people go up, it's called Harisa. They break their gates, right? They're breaking. And the Kehanim, and from Hashem's side, there's also B'yifroid. So like we have later Peretz Uzo, literally called like this. If Hashem sort of breaks through his boundaries, which is the same thing, then they will be hurt, they will be killed in the same way. Now Moshe answers Hashem a very interesting answer. He says, and it's sometimes read to say that they don't need a warning, they already know, you already told us. I don't know if we should read it this way. That sounds like a funny way to read it. I would say just Moshe is sort of telling Hashem, yes, we will listen to you. Just telling it, yes, they cannot go up because you've warned us and told us to make these gates around the mountain, to gate the mountain, so to speak, to make a border around the mountain. But I don't know if this is supposed to mean this is a dialogue. Like the way I'm reading all these stories, I should read them all simultaneously, so maybe it's not. But then we have a third time, which is why most people read it as dialogue, and Hashem says, no, go down. It doesn't say, of course, no. So this is all people reading it in. That's why I'm saying I'm not sure that that's really what's going on. It says, go down, and then you will go up with Aharon, and the Kehanim will not go up. So it seems like distinction. A second ago, it says the Kehanim are Nigash el Hashem, and then this second time, it says that the Kehanim and the Am should both not go up. So maybe it changed, or maybe Aharon is the only Kohen now, and the rest of the Kehanim don't get, or the way Chazal usually understood it, these are just different levels. So each person has his own level. Moshe, Aharon, Kehanim, the rest of the people, so each one shouldn't leave his level. These are all interpretations based on what's unclear in the text. And Moshe goes down and tells them, and we assume that he goes back up. But that's, again, that doesn't say in the text. And that's the end of this chapter.